The Selfie arrived at 6:47 a.m. while Rai Yurin was preparing traditional Korean breakfast for her twin sons, and for exactly 4 seconds her hands froze above the rice cooker. Her husband Baek Soo-ho lay shirtless in silk hotel sheets, his distinctive dragon and tiger neck tattoos on full display, the markings every associate in Seoul knew meant untouchable power. And behind him, hands possessively on his tattooed shoulders, stood Cherilyn, his black American mistress, her dark skin a stark contrast against his pale chest, her red nails claiming what she believed she'd won, her expression radiating triumphant ownership. The message underneath read, "He's mine now, thought you should see what real passion looks like, something a cold Korean wife could never give him." Most wives would have collapsed, would have cried quietly in shame, accepting their humiliation with traditional silence. Rai Yurin did something far more dangerous. She set down the rice paddle with perfect composure, bowed slightly to no one in particular, and walked to her bedroom to retrieve the leather folder she'd been preparing for exactly this moment. The one containing 18 months of evidence that would dismantle everything Soo-ho had built. Before we show you how Yurin destroyed a mafia empire while bowing respectfully, we're building a community that understands something powerful. In Korean culture, the most dangerous women aren't the ones who scream. They're the ones who smile, bow respectfully, and destroy you so quietly you never hear them coming. If you believe that revenge isn't about rage, it's about strategy, timing, and using someone's arrogance and cultural assumptions against them, subscribe and join us. Because what Yurin did next will prove that traditional femininity isn't weakness, it's the perfect camouflage for warfare. The Selfie glowed on her phone like a declaration of war, but Baek Soo-ho had made one fatal mistake. He thought bowing meant surrender. He was about to learn it meant preparation. The first time Rai Yurin understood she was living in a gilded cage, she was standing in front of floor-to-ceiling windows in their penthouse, watching Seoul's lights shimmer below like scattered stars. It was 3 months after the twins were born, and Soo-ho had just told her, not asked, told her, that she wouldn't be attending her sister's wedding in Busan because he needed her home that weekend for a dinner party with his associates. "You're my wife," he'd said, adjusting his cufflinks in the hallway mirror without looking at her. "That means something in my world. People need to see you here beside me. Your sister will understand." She hadn't argued. By then, she'd learned that arguing with Baek Soo-ho was like arguing with mountains, immovable, uninterested, ultimately pointless. The penthouse was a monument to his success and her disappearance. Expensive Joseon-era pottery lined shelves she'd never chosen. Custom furniture arranged by a designer Soo-ho hired without consulting her filled rooms where she spent most of her time alone. The kitchen had appliances imported from Germany that she'd never picked. Even her closet was stocked with hanbok and designer dresses Soo-ho approved of, elegant, expensive, appropriate for the wife of a man who needed to project traditional respectability while running Seoul's underworld. She was 32 years old and felt like an exhibit in someone else's museum. The isolation was surgical. Soo-ho controlled her phone, for security reasons, Yobo, you understand. He monitored spending through accounts bearing only his name. He'd slowly, methodically distanced her from her university friends with convenient excuses about safety concerns and scheduling conflicts, until her social circle consisted of other wives who spoke in careful euphemisms and avoided real conversation. But the affair with Cherilyn was different. That wasn't hidden, that was displayed. Yurin first saw them together at a charity gala 9 months before the twins were born. Soo-ho had his hand on Cherilyn's lower back, guiding her through the crowd with the same possessive confidence he used to guide Yurin. Cherilyn wore a red dress that hugged every curve, her dark skin radiant under the chandeliers, her natural hair styled in elaborate braids. She was beautiful, bold, everything opposite to the modest image Yurin was expected to maintain. When Yurin confronted him that night, Soo-ho had looked at her with something worse than guilt, indifference. "Don't be dramatic," he'd said, pouring himself whiskey in their bedroom while Yurin stood in the doorway, hands trembling. "You're my wife, she's my passion. In my world, powerful men have both." He'd paused, smiled slightly. "You should be grateful I chose a foreigner, at least you don't have to see her at family gatherings." The casual cruelty, the deliberate cultural insult, the absolute certainty that she was too bound by tradition and shame to ever fight back. Yurin had bowed deeply that night, the perfect Korean wife accepting her place. But her mind had already begun calculating what it would take to destroy him. The obstetrician's office smelled like lavender and disinfectant. a combination meant to soothe nervous mothers, but one that always made Yurin feel slightly nauseous. She sat in the waiting room, flipping through a parenting magazine she wasn't reading, waiting for her 6-month postpartum checkup. The twins were at home with the nanny. Suho had insisted on coming with her, which had surprised her until she realized he was using the appointment as cover for meetings he didn't want conducted at home. "I'll just be in the building," he'd said, already pulling out his phone. "Some business I need to handle nearby." Business never waited, it never could. Yurin had been experiencing exhaustion and persistent sadness over the past few months, probably normal after having twins, though her mother had warned her never to speak of it openly. In traditional Korean families, postpartum depression was shameful, a weakness that suggested inadequate motherhood. But her doctor had been kind, had prescribed supplements, had assured her it would pass with time and rest. She was reaching for her water bottle when she glanced through the waiting room window and saw Suho in the hallway. He was speaking with a man in an expensive suit, a doctor, judging by the hospital badge. They shook hands and something about the interaction felt wrong, calculated. Yurin waited 5 minutes, then slipped out a side door. She followed them at a distance to a quiet cafe 2 blocks away, the kind of place businessmen used for discreet conversations. She chose a table partially hidden by a decorative screen, close enough to hear, invisible enough to remain unnoticed. The man was Dr. Kang, apparently, a psychiatrist. "Her postpartum condition is documented," Suho was saying, his voice carrying that particular edge she'd learned to recognize. The tone he used when negotiating deals he considered already won. "In Korean family court, mental instability carries significant weight, especially for mothers. We build the case slowly: missed appointments, medication noncompliance, emotional episodes witnessed by household staff." Yurin's hand froze on her teacup. "By the time she realizes what's happening," Suho continued, "I'll have legal custody locked down. The twins stay with me, she leaves alone or she doesn't leave at all." Dr. Kang nodded, making notes. "The cultural stigma works in your favor. Her family will pressure her to stay quiet rather than face the shame of a public custody battle." The words hit Yurin like ice water. He wasn't just trapping her in their marriage. He was building a legal cage she didn't even know existed, using her exhaustion from caring for his children as evidence of unfitness, weaponizing the cultural shame that already made her reluctant to seek help. She stood slowly, her legs somehow steady despite the fact that her entire world had just restructured itself around a single terrible truth. She walked back to the hospital, collected her things, and went home on autopilot. She bowed to the doorman. She prepared dinner, galbijjim, Suho's favorite. She fed the twins, bathed them, sang them to sleep with traditional lullabies her grandmother had taught her. Only then, alone in the bathroom with the door locked, did she allow herself to understand her husband was never going to let her go. Yurin looked at her reflection in the mirror, pale, exhausted, disappearing, and pulled out her phone. Her hands didn't shake as she typed 3 Korean words into her notes app. His destruction. The law firm of Park Jinwoo occupied a modest office in Seottimungu, far from the glass towers of Gangnam where Suho's attorneys operated. Yurin had spent 3 weeks researching divorce lawyers on a burner phone she'd purchased with cash at a convenience store in Itaewon, a neighborhood where no one would recognize her. Most attorneys were either too connected to Suho's network or too terrified of his reputation to even consider taking his wife as a client. Then she found Park Jinwoo's name buried in a legal journal article about judicial corruption. He'd been a prominent sole attorney until 5 years ago when he'd exposed a family court judge taking bribes. The judge had kept his position. Park had lost his license. Someone who'd lost everything fighting the system, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. She'd arranged the meeting using her maiden name, Rai. The tea house was in Hongdae, tucked between art galleries and university cafes, the kind of place Suho would dismiss as beneath him, too bohemian, too common. Park Jinwoo arrived exactly on time. He was in his 50s, sharp-eyed despite the weariness around them, wearing a suit that was inexpensive now but had once been very expensive. The kind of detail that spoke of a man who'd fallen from grace but maintained his dignity. He sat down, studied her for a long moment, then said quietly in Korean, "You're Beek Suho's wife. I wondered when you'd find your way to someone like me." Yurin's composure didn't crack. "You know who I am." "I know who your husband is. I also know that women married to men like him don't meet disgraced attorneys in Hongdae tea houses unless they're planning something significant. He poured tea for both of them, the gesture deliberately traditional, respectful. The question is whether you're serious or just exploring options. I'm serious, Yurin said quietly, but I don't need a divorce. I need to dismantle his ability to ever use the law against me or my children. Park's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with interest. That's not a divorce, that's warfare. It requires time, perfect secrecy, and evidence that can destroy a criminal empire through legitimate channels. He leaned back. How long are we talking about? 18 months, maybe 2 years. We'll need documentation of money laundering in his legitimate businesses, signatures on documents he doesn't realize authorize his own destruction, and we'll need to do this while you continue being the perfect Korean wife. He named his price, 50 million won, cash delivered to a location he'd provide, encrypted communications only, her name never mentioned. And if this goes wrong, Park said, his voice hardening, I was never your attorney, we never had this conversation. He studied her carefully. If you're not absolutely certain, walk away now, because once we start building this case there's no going back. You either destroy him completely or he destroys you. There's no middle ground with men like Baek Soo-ho. Yurin thought about her sons sleeping peacefully at home, unaware their father was planning to weaponize their mother's exhaustion against her. She thought about the woman she used to be before she became a performance of traditional femininity. She thought about 18 months of perfect deception. I'm certain, she said. Park Jin-woo extended his hand across the table. Then let's begin building your husband's end. Over the next 18 months, Rai Yurin became a ghost in her own life. Not the kind that haunts, but the kind that moves through rooms unnoticed, essential but invisible, present but dismissed. She started small, a property document that needed signing while Soo-ho was on a call. This tax form is so confusing, Yobo. Could you just sign here and here? She'd slide the paper across his desk with a pen already in hand, her voice soft and apologetic. He'd sign without reading, barely glancing at her, because why would he? Yurin didn't understand complicated financial documents. Yurin was just making sure the household paperwork was handled. Except Yurin understood everything. She'd spent 3 months studying corporate finance through online courses accessed on her burner phone during the twins' afternoon naps. She'd learned to read balance sheets, to recognize shell companies, to spot the elegant fraud woven through Soo-ho's legitimate businesses like poison through veins. Every signature Soo-ho made on those household documents was actually authorization for financial audits, amended corporate filings, updated beneficiary designations that slowly, methodically transferred legal authority away from his control. She photographed everything: bank statements left on his desk, contracts forgotten in his briefcase, legal documents filed in his home office showing the intricate web of import-export companies he used to legitimize money that started in Seoul's underworld. She used a high-resolution camera Park had provided, uploaded images through encrypted channels, deleted every trace from her devices. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence, it was the performance. One evening she lifted Soo-ho's fingerprint from a soju glass while he laughed on the phone with someone, probably Cherilyn. Park had arranged for a security specialist to create a duplicate. 2 weeks later, while Soo-ho was in Busan with his mistress, Yurin accessed his home safe hidden behind a false panel in his study. Inside sat rows of documents, hard drives, stacks of emergency cash. She photographed everything, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. She had to smile at Soo-ho across the dinner table while mentally cataloging which documents she'd photographed that day. She had to listen to him discuss Cherilyn. He'd stopped hiding it entirely, and respond with the quiet resignation of a woman who'd accepted her place. She had to sleep beside a man she was systematically destroying and wake each morning ready to perform again. There were nights she almost broke, watching Soo-ho ignore their son's first words because he was texting his mistress, standing beside him at business galas while Cherilyn held court across the room, her laughter carrying like a taunt. An anniversary he forgot entirely because he was in Jeju with her. But each betrayal became fuel, each humiliation became evidence. By month 12, Park confirmed they had enough documentation to freeze Soo-ho's assets and prove fraud in 7 different corporate entities. By month 16, they had custody protections so comprehensive that even judges in Soo-ho's pocket couldn't easily override them without risking their own careers. Park's encrypted message arrived on a Tuesday evening. We're ready, we just need the perfect moment. Yurin replied with a single character, waiting. The credit card alert came through at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. Yurin was in bed pretending to sleep while Suho got dressed for another late meeting. She felt her phone vibrate under her pillow and waited until she heard the penthouse door close before checking it. Grand Hyatt Seoul, the presidential suite, charged to the card they shared. The same hotel where they'd spent their wedding night 7 years ago, when Yurin still believed marriage meant something to him. For 3 seconds she felt rage rise like fire in her chest, hot, consuming, dangerous. Then she channeled it into something colder, something useful. The next morning she did something she hadn't done in months. She smiled at breakfast. A real smile, warm and genuine, the kind that used to make Suho pause and remember why he'd married her. "Good morning, Yobo," she said softly, pouring his coffee exactly how he liked it. "Did your meeting go well?" He looked up from his phone, momentarily confused by her warmth. "Fine, why?" "No reason, I just realized I've been distant lately, stressed about the children." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "I want to be better for you, for us." The confusion in his eyes shifted to satisfaction. This was what he wanted, a wife who knew her place, who'd finally accepted the reality of their arrangement. Over the next 3 weeks, Yurin became the perfect wife at her highest level. She cooked his favorite dishes, galbai jjim, samgyetang, japchae, made exactly how his mother used to make it. She spoke even more softly, bowed even lower, anticipated his needs before he voiced them. One evening, while serving dinner, she mentioned casually, "I've been speaking with my mother. She'd like the twins to visit the ancestral village in Gangwon province, just for a few weeks so they can learn about their heritage, connect with their grandmother." Suho barely looked up from his phone. "Sure, whatever, that backward village, fine, keep them away from Seoul's air pollution." He had no idea she'd just established a legitimate reason to have the children out of the city when everything collapsed. What Suho also didn't notice was the effect Yurin's performance was having on Cherilyn. The mistress had been messaging her occasionally over the past year, taunting texts, photos of expensive gifts Suho bought her, selfies from restaurants where Yurin had once dined with her husband. But Yurin's sudden transformation into the even more perfect traditional wife made Cherilyn insecure. The messages became more frequent, more aggressive, more desperate to prove she'd won. Yurin understood the psychology perfectly. Park had helped her research it. The mistress who wants to be acknowledged, who needs public validation, who can't resist the urge to gloat when she feels threatened by the wife's apparent perfection. Threatened mistresses make mistakes. In the twins' room, Yurin packed their belongings slowly, methodically. Extra clothes folded with care, favorite toys tucked into bags. She told them stories about their grandmother's village, the mountains, the streams, the traditional hanok where their ancestors had lived for generations. "Are we going on vacation, Iyama?" one of the twins asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Yurin said softly, stroking his hair. "A very special vacation." She didn't tell them they would never return. The selfie arrived at 6:47 a.m. and Yurin stared at it for exactly 4 seconds before her hands stopped shaking and her mind went perfectly, crystalline clear. The image was everything she'd been waiting for. Suho shirtless, his distinctive dragon and tiger neck tattoos on full display, the markings that identified him as untouchable in Seoul's underworld. Cherilyn behind him, her hands possessively on his shoulders, her expression radiating triumphant ownership. The timestamp embedded in the metadata. 6:23 a.m. location, Grand Hyatt Seoul Presidential Suite, GPS coordinates precise to the meter. The text beneath made Yurin's decision even easier. "He's mine now, thought you should see what real passion looks like, something a cold Korean wife could never give him." Yurin set the phone down on the kitchen counter beside the rice cooker and looked around one final time. The imported appliances she'd never chosen, the designer cabinets that had never felt like home, the prison disguised as luxury that had been slowly suffocating her for 7 years. Then she picked up the phone and typed 2 words in Korean. "It's already over." She pressed send and immediately opened her burner phone, 1 word to Park. "Now." The confirmation came back in 30 seconds, executing. Yurin moved with surgical precision. She woke the twins gently, dressed them in comfortable clothes, told them they were starting their adventure early. By 7:30 a.m. they were in the car park had arranged 3 weeks ago, a driver who asked no questions, paid in cash through untraceable channels. While they drove toward Gangwon province, Park's plan unfolded across Seoul like falling dominoes. Emergency custody orders filed with the family court, citing 18 months of documented evidence that Soo-ho had planned to fabricate mental health concerns. Financial investigations initiated into 7 of his import-export companies, each one backed by photographed proof of systematic money laundering. Asset freezes that would hit his legitimate business accounts by noon. And the masterstroke, the beautiful, devastating centerpiece of their strategy. Through a carefully selected intermediary, information began spreading through Seoul's underworld. Cherilyn Vale, the Black American mistress, wasn't just a mistress. She was an FBI informant, cultivated over 18 months as part of a long-term operation to infiltrate Korean organized crime networks operating in the United States. The evidence was circumstantial but convincing. Her frequent travels between Seoul and Los Angeles, her unprecedented access to Soo-ho's private spaces, his phone, his documents. The timing of recent law enforcement actions against his U.S. associates, actions that seemed impossible unless someone very close had been feeding information. It didn't need to be true, it just needed to create paranoia. By 10:00 a.m., Yurin and the twins arrived at her family's ancestral home in Gangwon province. Her grandmother stood in the courtyard of the traditional hanok, arms open, traditional Korean tea already prepared. "Welcome home, child," she said in Korean, embracing Yurin. "Welcome home." By noon, while Soo-ho was still asleep beside his mistress in the Grand Hyatt, the custody order was officially filed, the asset freeze was in effect, and the FBI informant rumors were spreading through every level of his organization like wildfire. At 12:47 p.m., while Yurin was teaching her sons to bow respectfully to their great-grandmother, Baek Soo-ho's phone started ringing. And the ringing would not stop for 72 hours. Baek Soo-ho woke to the sound of a phone ringing like an alarm he couldn't silence. Not his cell phone, the hotel room phone, the landline he'd forgotten even existed. He opened his eyes to unfamiliar ceiling, expensive sheets, and Cherilyn's arm draped across his chest. The Grand Hyatt, he remembered now. The phone kept ringing. He reached across Cherilyn, who stirred but didn't wake, and grabbed the receiver. "What?" "Sir." The voice was Kim Tae-sung, his head of security, and it had an edge Soo-ho hadn't heard in 15 years. "We have multiple situations. I need you to check your phone immediately." Soo-ho sat up, the pleasant fog of sleep evaporating instantly. He'd survived 2 decades at the top of Seoul's underworld by recognizing when something was catastrophically wrong, and every instinct was screaming. "What situations?" "Your accounts have been frozen, emergency custody orders have been filed, and sir," Kim paused, the kind of pause that preceded very bad news. "There are rumors spreading through the organization about Cherilyn. People are saying she's FBI." The words didn't make sense. Soo-ho looked at Cherilyn, very much Korean American, very much asleep beside him. "That's impossible, she's right here." "I know, sir, that's the problem. Someone's suggesting she was cultivated as an informant. Your U.S. connections are panicking, your rivals are moving, and your business associates are asking questions we can't answer." Soo-ho grabbed his cell phone from the nightstand. 37 missed calls, 63 text messages, every single one from people in his organization, his legitimate businesses, his carefully maintained network of power. He opened the first message from his accountant. "All business accounts frozen pending fraud investigation. Call immediately." The second from his attorney. "Emergency custody order granted. Your wife cited documented evidence of your plan to fabricate mental health concerns. We need to talk now." The third from his second-in-command. "Americans saying Cherilyn is FBI informant. U.S. connections cutting ties. Seoul rivals suggesting you compromised the organization for a woman. What the hell is happening?" Soo-ho scrolled back through his messages and found Yurin's response from hours ago. 2 words in Korean. "It's already over." The horror of understanding crashed over him like ice water. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. This was surgical. His wife, the quiet, traditional, perfectly obedient wife who bowed and served tea and never questioned him, had just executed a multi-front attack designed to destroy him completely. The FBI informant rumor was brilliant. It didn't matter if it was true. His choice of a black American mistress, already controversial among his more traditional Korean associates, now looked like catastrophic judgment, reckless, compromised. He called his house, no answer. He had Kim check the penthouse. "Sir, the residence is empty. Mrs. Beek and the children aren't here. Their belongings are gone." The security cameras were looped. Professional work. "Where would she go?" Suho demanded, his voice lethal. Kim hesitated. "Sir, her family's village in Gangwon province, but you always said that place was too backward to matter," Suho finished, the words bitter in his mouth. His arrogance, his dismissal of Yurin's traditional connections, his certainty that she was too culturally bound by shame to ever fight back, all of it had been camouflage for something he'd never seen coming. For the first time in 20 years of controlling Seoul's underworld, Baek Suho realized he'd been outplayed. And the woman who defeated him had done it while bowing respectfully. The 3 days that followed were a masterclass in controlled demolition. Suho fought on every front simultaneously, but each battle cost him ground he couldn't recover. The FBI informant rumor spread through Seoul's underworld like poison, and to save his organization he had to make a choice that burned. Cherilyn was escorted from the hotel room by his security team at 2:00 p.m. that first day. Her belongings boxed, her phone number blocked, her key card to his penthouse deactivated. She'd been confused at first, then furious, screaming at Kim in the hotel hallway, then terrified as she realized she wasn't being protected, she was being discarded to save Suho's reputation. "You used me," she'd shouted as security led her away. "You're throwing me away like trash." Suho had watched from the penthouse window, his face expressionless. He couldn't afford sentiment, not when his Korean rivals were already moving against his territory in Gangnam and Itaewon, sensing weakness, exploiting the chaos. His legitimate business partners were distancing themselves from the fraud investigations. His U.S. connections had gone silent, spooked by the FBI rumors. His legal team struggled against the custody order because the evidence was overwhelming. 18 months of documented plans to fabricate mental illness. Witness testimony from household staff, people Yurin had quietly cultivated with kindness while Suho ignored them. Expert testimony about the weaponization of postpartum depression stigma in Korean family courts. Meanwhile, 3 hours south in Gangwon province, Yurin was experiencing something she hadn't felt in 7 years: peace. Her grandmother's traditional hanok sat nestled in mountains Suho had always dismissed as backward, provincial, beneath notice. The twins, initially confused by the sudden change, began adapting with the resilience of children. They helped their great-grandmother in the garden, planting vegetables and learning the names of herbs in Korean. They learned traditional games, heard stories about ancestors who'd lived in these mountains for generations. The village was too small for Suho's network to have real reach. Her family protected her quietly, traditionally, not with violence or intimidation but with the collective strength of community. Neighbors who'd known her grandmother for 50 years, elders who remembered Yurin as a child, a network of protection built on relationships, not fear. The 72-hour deadline arrived like a guillotine. The custody order would become permanent unless Suho could present compelling counter-evidence in family court. But he was trapped in an impossible equation. Every hour spent trying to locate his family was an hour his empire fractured further. Every resource diverted to the custody battle was a resource his rivals exploited. On the third day, his attorney delivered the devastating news in Suho's empty penthouse. "The judge has ruled permanent custody to the mother." The attorney's voice was carefully neutral. "The evidence of your plan to fabricate mental health concerns was overwhelming. Additionally, there were documented concerns about the children's exposure to criminal activity." "Which judge?" Suho asked quietly. "Judge Hanmin Seo." Suho closed his eyes, one of the few family court judges he didn't own, specifically chosen, he realized now, for exactly that reason. He stood alone in the penthouse after the attorney left, looking at family photos on the wall. His wedding to Yurin, the twins' first birthday, images of a life that had stopped being real years ago. His choice to humiliate his wife culturally, to flaunt Cherilyn as the ultimate insult to traditional Korean femininity, had destroyed him completely. And Yurin had won by being exactly what he'd trained her to be: invisible, obedient, and fatally underestimated. 6 months passed like seasons changing in the mountains, slowly, naturally healing. Rai Yurin and her sons lived in her grandmother's village now, in the traditional hanok where her ancestors had lived for generations. The twins were fluent in Korean, attending the small local school where teachers knew every student's name. They learned traditional crafts, calligraphy, pottery, the art of making kimchi with their great-grandmother. They grew vegetables in the garden and played in mountain streams, their laughter echoing off ancient stone walls. Yurin worked remotely, connected through Park to an international organization that helped women escape organized crime marriages. She reviewed financial documents, recognizing patterns of money laundering with expertise that was the ironic gift of her marriage to Suho. She understood exactly how criminal empires legitimized dirty money through shell companies and falsified invoices because she lived inside one for 7 years, photographing evidence while serving tea and bowing respectfully. She was helping other women dismantle the cages built around them, one financial document at a time. In Seoul, Baek Suho's empire lay in ruins. The asset freeze continued as investigations proceeded, layer after layer of fraud exposed. His organization had fractured during those critical 72 hours, rivals had taken territory in Gangnam and Itaewon, associates had defected to stronger bosses, legitimate business partners had severed all ties. The FBI informant rumor, though never proven true, had destroyed his credibility with U.S. connections permanently. Most bitter of all, Cherilyn, furious and vindictive after being discarded so publicly, had given interviews to Korean media outlets. Detailed, humiliating interviews about their affair, about Suho's private habits, about conversations she'd overheard regarding his criminal enterprises. She'd sold her story to the highest bidder and disappeared to Lowe's Angels. Suho was fighting legal battles on multiple fronts, bleeding money on attorneys, unable to rebuild because the custody battle had consumed everything: his focus, his resources, his reputation. The encrypted email from Park arrived on a Tuesday morning while Yurin was having tea with her grandmother. Subject: final judgment. The court had granted permanent sole custody. All children's trusts had been transferred to Yurin's control. A permanent restraining order prevented Suho from any contact with or attempt to locate Yurin or the twins, enforceable across international borders. Yurin set down her phone and looked out at the courtyard where her sons were playing. They were laughing, speaking rapid Korean with their great-grandmother, learning to plant spring vegetables in soil their family had tended for centuries. For the first time since her wedding day, Yurin allowed herself a genuine smile, not the performed smile of a submissive wife, but the peaceful smile of a woman who'd won by being underestimated. Her grandmother poured more tea, her weathered hands steady and sure. "Your great-grandmother would be proud," she said quietly in Korean. "The strongest women in our family have always known true power doesn't announce itself, it works in silence, strikes with precision, and leaves no trace." Yurin nodded, watching her sons. They would grow up knowing their Korean heritage not as a weapon used against their mother but as a source of strength, identity, and protection. They would learn that tradition and strategy weren't opposites, they were tools that could be wielded with devastating precision by those patient enough to wait for the perfect moment. Somewhere in Seoul, Baek Suho was learning what it cost to underestimate a woman simply because she bowed respectfully. And in a quiet village in Gangwon Province, Rai Yurin was teaching her sons that the most dangerous victories are the ones no one sees coming. Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Where in the world are you turning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect and share our thoughts. I appreciate the time you spent here with me today.